Before we dive into one of the biggest failures in automotive history, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and fasten your seatbelts. An incredible story lies ahead. Let's go! $250 million, or more than $2.2 billion in 2025. That's the estimated loss Ford incurred as a result of launching the Edsel project, which is now considered one of the biggest marketing failures in the history of the automobile industry. In this video, we'll tell the tragic story of a car brand born in agony, only to die just 3 years after its debut. By the early 1930s, General Motors, thanks to Alfred Sloan's clear organizational system, had become a model for all automakers. GM had specialized divisions for each price category, making it the benchmark for management. All American automakers tried to adopt this approach, from small companies like Kaiser Frazer to giants like Chrysler. The only exception was Ford. Henry Ford continued to stick to his policy: mass production of cheap cars in huge quantities, and complete disregard for fashion trends. This strategy worked perfectly during the Great Depression, but as the economy recovered, its main drawback became clear: the absence of models in the mid-price segment. Yes, in 1922, Ford bought the bankrupt Lincoln brand and successfully revived it. But between Ford and Lincoln, there was a huge price gap into which tens of thousands of potential buyers disappeared. Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford, who took over the company in 1919, was much less conservative than his father. However, it wasn't until 1937 that he managed to convince Henry of the need to create a new brand that could fill the gap between Ford and Lincoln. Thus, in 1939, Mercury appeared, aimed at the same niche as GM's Oldsmobile and Pontiac, as well as Hudson. Edsel died of cancer in 1943. And in 1945, his son Henry Ford II became president of Ford Motor Company. Despite his young age, only 27 years old, he quickly realized the company was in deep crisis. The only way out was to adopt new management methods, which General Motors had long and successfully used. In 1946, Henry Ford II completely renewed the company's leadership, and the key direction was the systematic expansion of the model range. By 1949, Ford introduced an updated lineup: Ford $1,300 to $1,900, Mercury $2,000 to $2,003, Lincoln $2,500 to $3,003, and the flagship Lincoln Cosmopolitan $3,200 to $3,000. On paper, it seemed that all market niches were covered. But in reality, there was a huge price gap between the most expensive Mercury and the most affordable Lincoln, almost $1,000. Marketing research showed that only 1 in 4 Ford owners eventually moved to Mercury or Lincoln, whereas at GM, almost 80% of Chevrolet buyers, sooner or later, bought more expensive models of the corporation. Henry Ford II understood perfectly well that the niche between Mercury and Lincoln could not be left empty. Therefore, in September 1948, just 3 months before the release of the updated 1949 lineup, he ordered a new marketing study to assess consumer preferences in the segment between Lincoln and Mercury and explore the possibility of launching a new model. However, the Korean War that broke out in 1950 and subsequent shortages of strategic materials prevented the company from implementing the plan. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. When in the 1952 model year, Lincoln stopped producing its short wheelbase models, the price gap between Mercury and Lincoln increased to almost $1,000. The need to launch a new model became even more obvious. In the summer of 1952, Ford Motor Company's Vice President of Sales, John Davis, presented Henry Ford II with a new study. This 6-volume work, called the Davis Book, convincingly proved that the company desperately needed to increase the number of divisions from 2 to 3. At the same time, the flagship position should go to a new brand positioned above Lincoln, and its production should be handled by a newly created division called the Special Products Division. In addition, according to the book's conclusions, another intermediate brand should appear between Ford and Mercury. Henry Ford II generally approved the plan, but due to disagreements in management, its implementation was delayed. Work on the concept began, but real action started only in 1955. By this time, the chairman of the board of directors of Ford Motor Company was Ernie Breach, an experienced manager and the position of general manager of the Ford division was held by a young, ambitious Robert McNamara, the future U.S. Secretary of Defense. The vice president for planning of passenger and truck models was Louis Cruz. It was Cruz, with the support of Jack Reith, the former head of Ford's French division, who came up with a new plan to expand the company based on the Davis Book. The plan provided for increasing the number of divisions to 5, including the complete separation of Mercury and Lincoln, launching a new brand, Continental, which would take a position above Lincoln, and the appearance of another brand between Ford and Mercury, which received the working name E-Car Experimental Car. The new brand was supposed to allow Ford to increase the number of dealerships across the country. In the mid-50s, they had only half the number of dealers compared to General Motors, and this, according to Cruz and Reith, prevented Ford from competing with GM, which in 1954 sold more than 1 million cars, while Ford only a third of that. Despite resistance from some top managers, including John Davis himself, the author of the original study, Cruz and Reith managed to convince the board of directors. They argued that thanks to this plan, sales would grow by at least 20% in 6 years. As a result, on April 20, 1955, Ford Motor Company began a large-scale reorganization. Roy Brown, who had previously worked on Mercury models, was appointed chief designer of the E-Car project. His task was to create a car unlike any existing one, while using standardized Ford body panels to reduce costs. Brown was given almost complete freedom of action. A few months later, he presented the design of the new car as a clay model. The presentation was Brown's shining moment. The board of directors, including Ernie Breach, gave a standing ovation. It seemed the project was destined for success. Reality turned out differently. It later became clear that management's opinion did not match public perception. The rear of the car, with massive horizontal taillights in the shape of spread gull wings, appealed to many and was even temporarily copied by Chevrolet. But the front, especially the grille, caused negativity. Some compared it to a man's face after eating a lemon, others to a toilet lid, and some even saw female genitalia. For conservative America in the late 50s, this was a real shock. Meanwhile, Ford not only gave the project the green light, but also named the new brand after Henry Ford's late son, Edsel. Rumor has it that Ernie Breach played a decisive role in this, convincing Henry Ford II that it would be a tribute to Edsel's memory. On November 19, 1956, the company officially announced the creation of a new division. More than 1,000 new dealerships were planned to open across America. At the same time, the flagship Continental brand was launched with a price tag starting at $10,000. This project failed within months, and the division was closed. Its offices were taken over by Edsel's staff, the first warning sign. The brilliant plan of Cruz and Reith began to crack. In May 1957, Louis Cruz suffered a heart attack and retired early. He was replaced by Robert McNamara, a fierce opponent of the entire concept. In August of the same year, Jack Reith was fired as head of the Mercury brand. Mercury and Lincoln were merged back into one division. From the original idea, only Edsel remained. Production was set up at Ford and Mercury's upgraded plants in the US and Canada. Initially, Edsel was supposed to get its own factory, but that never happened. Combining the assembly of Ford, Mercury, and Edsel at the same facilities seemed reasonable to reduce costs. In practice, it led to chaos. Despite standardized parts, Edsel had many unique components, complicating the process and causing defects. The build quality of Ford and Mercury in 1957 was already questionable, but Edsel's was even worse. Quality control was virtually absent, and the company could not fix it. Meanwhile, preparations for a loud premiere were in full swing. The launch was scheduled for September 4, 1957. A massive advertising campaign had been running for months, promising buyers the car of the future, built with new technology. Ford expected to sell 200,000 Edsels a year, but reality was very different. The design, which the public disliked, and poor build quality overshadowed all the innovations the brand actually introduced. Among them were a domed speedometer, warning lights for low oil and engaged parking brake, a push-button gear selector in the steering wheel hub, self-adjusting drum brakes, child locks on rear doors, and even seat belts as standard, while competitors offered them as an option. But nobody paid attention to this. The public only saw the controversial look and defective assembly. The key problem lay elsewhere: unclear positioning. Instead of filling the gap between Ford and Mercury, Edsel ended up practically in Mercury's territory, both in price and size. Moreover, top Edsel versions overlapped with Ford Fairlane 500. Ironically, the project was originally conceived to bridge the gap between Mercury and Lincoln. But after 9 years of bureaucracy, outdated research, and internal conflicts, the new model appeared completely out of place. And then the economic backdrop hit. The Edsel launch coincided with the Eisenhower recession, which hit the mid-price segment hardest. Some brands lost up to 30% of customers in 1958. Mercury's sales fell by almost half. Edsel, despite introducing 3 station wagons in 1958, Roundup, Villager, and Bermuda, sold only 63,000 cars, less than a third of the target. Interestingly, many of these cars were assembled at Ford's Canadian plants, where quality control was better and their owners were satisfied. But there were too few Canadian Edsels to save the situation. Objectively, Edsel was a modern, comfortable car. Length from 213 to 220 inches, rich trim, powerful engines, including a top 6.7-liter V8 with 345 horsepower and 475 pound-feet, accelerating the nearly 2-ton sedan to 60 miles per hour in 8 seconds. But the market didn't care. By the end of 1958, Ford realized the project was sinking. In early 1959, Edsel lost its status as a separate division and was merged into Lincoln Mercury, renamed Mercury Edsel Lincoln Division. By 1960, Edsel's lineup was reduced to 3 models: Ranger, Corsair, and Villager wagon. The cars were simplified, prices were lowered, engine sizes reduced, design made more conservative. It was also planned to move the brand out of the mid-price segment and make it more affordable. In 1960, a new compact model, Comet, was to appear on Ford Falcon architecture and eventually replace Edsel. But Edsel didn't survive. Only 2,400 orders were placed for the 1960 models, and total sales were 2,846 units. In November 1960, the Edsel brand was officially killed. Over 3 years, 110,847 cars were built. The Comet was eventually launched under the Mercury brand. In 1960, it sold 116,000 units, helping the Lincoln Mercury division through tough times. Why did Edsel fail? Historians and experts have debated this for decades, and there are many theories. Bad timing. The recession hit the mid-price segment. Marketing mistakes. Research was outdated, and conclusions wrong. Weak positioning. Instead of bridging Mercury and Lincoln, Edsel competed with Mercury and even Ford. Polarizing design, a face that ate a lemon, a toilet lid, and some saw obscene shapes. Quality issues, especially in U.S. plants. All these factors played a role. But there's another theory, far more intriguing. According to it, Edsel's failure was sabotaged by Robert McNamara. Why would he do that? Simple. McNamara was head of the Ford division, which made budget cars, and he saw Edsel as a threat. If the new brand succeeded, his division would lose influence. Here's the detective-like version. McNamara insisted that Edsel be built at Ford plants, not its own factory. Quality was poor from the start, and quality control allegedly looked the other way. Canadian Edsels, which McNamara had less control over, had good build quality. There's even evidence that during the Edsel launch on September 4, 1957, McNamara told a journalist, "Don't worry, we'll bury this ugly thing soon." And indeed, by 1960, Edsel was dead, and McNamara became president of Ford Motor Company. Coincidence? Hardly. Edsel lived for just 3 model years. Ford's losses are estimated at $250 million, over $2.2 billion in today's money. This is one of the most spectacular failures in automotive history. But time changes everything. Today, surviving Edsels, fewer than 10,000 remain, have become prized collectibles. Rare versions, like 1960 Ranger convertibles and hardtops, fetch $100,000 or even $200,000 at auctions. Edsel went down in history as a car that was unlucky, with timing, leadership, and reputation. But that's its magic. It became a symbol that even giants like Ford can make mistakes.